Democrats are realizing now that they have a crime problem on their hands, and America's pretty tired of it. I can't even imagine what the internal polling looks like. So they are scrambling to fix this problem that, don't doubt it for a second, they did create with their policies. Curtis Hill, former Indiana Attorney General, he joins us now to talk about it. Mr. Hill, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Dana, thanks for having me.
Of course. So I was looking at, because I know you've talked about this quite a bit, and you've been tweeting about this. I was looking at some of your social media, some of your remarks earlier, and I had to bring up, because last week we had New York Governor Andrew Cuomo come out and say, well, really it's more people are dying from gun violence and crime than coronavirus, but he never actually, in any of his proposals as to how to solve this problem, it never went into deterrence for criminals. It never went into making sure that, whatever reforms we need to strengthen good policing, that any of that is passed. It all seemed to kind of rest on the shoulders of just the law-abiding and the innocent, who would like to actually be able to protect themselves since the police are defunded. And now it seems that every other, whether they're governor or mayor of a blue state or blue city, they've now adopted these talking points. And I'm curious as to your take on all of this.
Well, this has been the longstanding policy of Democrats and liberals with regard to justice, creating a social justice atmosphere. So you've seen it in big cities where big city DAs have taken blanket statements that there are whole lots of criminal laws that they're just going to abandon, disregard, as though they were the legislative body. That's not a prosecutor's function. If we look back at the history of this, we've seen crime rising now as a result of policies that have been in place for the last few years, attacking what they call mass incarceration. Well, I got news for you. Just a few short years ago, we saw in this country a dramatic reduction in murder rate, at a 50% reduction over 30 years. We saw rape and violent crime, 30 to 40% reduction over that same 30-year period. What that tells me, Dana, is that we were locking up the right people. In this nation, there's the vast majority of crime is committed by a very small percentage of people. And if we effectively deal with that small percentage of people that are repeat offenders, if we lock them up, we can show a dramatic reduction in crime and increase the public safety.
And you bring up a really good point. We're talking to Mr. Curtis Hill, former AG of Indiana. You bring up a really good point. I was looking at some of New York State's, some of the policies that they had. They had passed this bail reform, cashless bail, just basically letting people just kind of sign and walk. And it was so disastrous, they had to start. I mean, it's not fun. It's funny that they thought this would work, but it's incredibly sad because of the torture that it put innocent people through, because the murders increased as a result of this. This is one of the things that their police had even cited. They had to walk back portions of that bill because there were numerous people that they would just allow to walk, and then a couple of hours later, and one of the stories that I had gone over, committed murdered a teenager. In Chicago, the same difference. One of the lowest prosecution rates, for instance, of felony gun charges, but also when it comes to murder, drugs, gang violence, assault. I mean, it seems as though you have these prosecutors and these judges that give wrist slaps, or they just drop charges altogether. And it amazes me I understand that they have discretion, but at what point is it discretion and then just insanity? And what can be done to maybe prevent that from happening? I mean, is that the DOJ's job?
Well, Dana, there's a big difference between discretion, which is in a particular individual case, a prosecutor, and I was one for a number of years, a prosecutor evaluates the case, reviews the evidence, and proceeds accordingly, using discretion to move forward or not. That's entirely appropriate. But what prosecutors are doing in terms of making blanket assessments and even pronouncements of offenses that they will not prosecute. We're not going to prosecute prostitution. We're not going to prosecute drug crimes. We're not going to prosecute defecating on the sidewalk. I mean, these are ridiculous statements, and it's abdicating their responsibility as law enforcement officials, and they're invading the province of the legislature and, in effect, vetoing the will of the people. This is not the way that prosecutors should operate. Prosecutors should uphold the law, move forward, and I'm very appalled at what I've been seeing over the course of the last few years in the state of prosecutions and law enforcement.
Yes, and you had a really good editorial where you were kind of talking about this environment of lawlessness too that's been created, and some of that you use as an example the Chaz Chop. I know they changed their name in Seattle, where they had this kind of autonomous zone, these protest zones, and the crime there. They didn't want police to intervene, and sadly, a teenager lost his life in one of these protest zones. And this, I want you to speak a little bit to the environment of lawlessness, because I can't imagine anything emboldening criminal activity than having your city or your mayor, your governor, just allow you to take over a couple of city blocks and do whatever you want.
Well, we saw it all over the country. In the aftermath of George Floyd, you had police officers lined up, ready to do their job, and then being told to stand down by their local or state leadership. So we saw countless numbers of people going into stores, looting, walking right in front of the police, attacking the police. And we wonder why lawlessness is expanding the way that it is. If I'm a police officer, and keep in mind, Dana, we have given these folks the authority. We've given them a gun and a badge, and we've said, protect us and sacrifice your life if need be. And yet we don't back the police. We don't support the police. And we see all of these attacks coming on board. It's no wonder that we have any police at all. And if we're going to have the police stand down during riots and tense situations, well, guess what? The criminals get an understanding of what they can get away with. And that's what we brought onto ourselves.
Yeah, you mentioned funding and support for police as well. I was looking at this USA Today poll, and this is one of the most recent ones, a USA Today Ipsos poll that says fewer than 1 in 5 support defund the police. And every group, whether it's Black Americans, white Americans, Hispanic Americans, they want police to maintain a local presence. It sounds like Democrats are kind of out of touch with voters here.
Well, it's a stupid thing. I mean, the folks who get the most protection by the police are people in low-income neighborhoods where crime is rampant. The good folks in those neighborhoods want the police. They need the police. And so this idea that we can simply wave a magic wand and make crime go away, these folks are bad people, and it's time that we wake up and smell the coffee. We're looking at people who are out engaging in bad activities, and it's not always a racist situation. Sometimes you're just dealing with someone who is no good and needs to be addressed in that way. And in many instances, these are folks who have committed multiple felony offenses. And if we would certainly respond accordingly in the criminal justice system, like we were doing a few years ago, we would see greater reductions in crime and increases in public safety.